Welcome everybody to the second installment of the how-tos, right? We're doing a how-to series, how to prepare y'all for the World Series of Poker for playing different games. We started with 7-card stud. Hope you guys got a lot out of that. Gave you basic principles on how, first of all, how it works and some tips on, strategy advice on what to do. So this week we're going to cover a game that is easily the second most popular form of poker in the world today, and that would be pot limit Omaha. A lot of the young geniuses who learned how to play no limit hold'em, PLO was a nice transition for them. It was much easier for them to go from no limit hold'em to PLO than it would be, we call it PLO, right? That's what the cool kids call it. To go from PLO to something like stud 8 or better, right? Because it's a big bet game, it plays rather similarly, although there's some huge differences with pot limit Omaha, and we're going to discuss a lot of those. But before we get there, let's talk about the rules. How does pot limit Omaha work? Well, it's pot limit, which means at any point you can only bet the pot. Okay, that's your max bet. Just whatever the pot, you could say to dealer, pot, I bet the pot. That's the maximum. And the way that it works is just like hold'em in the sense that everyone gets 4 cards instead of 2, right? There's a button, small blind, big blind, and it plays just like it would before the flop, a typical hold'em game, except there's no antes, typically, and you also are dealing with a situation where you just can't go all in, right? You can only bet pot. Now there'll be a flop, turn, river, just like hold'em. That should be pretty self-explanatory. However, with pot limit Omaha, you can only use, and you must use, 2 cards from your hand and 3 cards from the board. So it always has to be a combination of 2 from your hand, 3 from the board. So if 4 hearts come on the board and you have the ace of hearts, unless you have another heart in there, sorry, you don't have a flush, okay? So it's a 5-card game, just like hold'em, except like I said, you must use 2 from your hand and 3 from the board specifically. So you might be wondering, with a game like this, how do you find 4 cards that are not good, right? Because it seems like, man, I got 4 cards, Jack 9, 6, 4. I got all kinds of combinations. Well, just like with any game, there are better hands than others, and we're going to talk first and foremost about some of those really strong hands, and essentially the best hand in the game you can get, and it's arguable. People debate in terms of playability whether ace, ace, king, king double suited is better than ace, ace, jack 10 double suited, or vice versa. Either way, who cares, because they're both amazing, and I'm happy to just go bonkers with them before the flop. So high pair hands can be really profitable if you play them well. One of the things you want to be wary of is if you have a hand like ace, ace, jack 4 with no suit, that's not that strong a hand if you get more than one opponent, right? Heads up, you're going to be a small favorite against the player's entire range, unless, of course, they also have aces, because that happens too, right? A lot more often than it would in hold'em, where you have 2 players go all in and they both have aces, and what decides it are those other 2 key cards. So the one guy's coming in with the double suited jack 10, you're coming in with the 9 and the 4 off suit. How you going to win that one, right? It's not going to happen. So high pairs like kings, aces, queens I wouldn't even really call all that high, queens, jacks, 10s. I'm talking specifically aces hands and kings hands. You want to have a little bit something with them if you plan to play them aggressively before the flop. And because pot limit Omaha is a game that is so position dependent, you can play these hands a lot more aggressively when you're in position, in terms of making pots bigger than you would want to maybe out of the blind. So for example, if it goes raise, call, 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 and you're in the big blind with ace, ace, 9, 4, if you're playing really deep, if you're playing short stack, whip it in. You can't be making a mistake. If you can get it all in with a pot size bet, you should always do that. However, if you're playing really deep, like 200-300 big blinds deep, this isn't the kind of hand you want to re-raise with, because what's going to often happen is, you get call, 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 4-way action, and the chances of your hand winning just on its own, aces, is very slim. And it's not like you're going to be able to ram it through against most opponents. Okay, so when you run them hot and cold, big pairs are, the best hands. When I say hot and cold, what I mean is run them before the flop, right? Aces against non-aces is a favorite, right? It's a favorite over even the good runs. It's just better. However, that's just not how the game works, because there is betting. And the second group of hands I want to cover that are really powerful are what you call runs, which is essentially 4 cards, or 4 cards really close to each other. It doesn't have to be exact. Like 9, 10, jack, queen is really powerful. But if you had 8, 10, jack, queen, it's not like it sucks, right? They're all still 4 cards that are connected, that when you hit the flop, you hit it with gusto. You might hit 2 pair and a straight draw. You might flop a straight with 2 pair. There's a lot of good things that can happen. Ideally, they be double suited. They don't have to necessarily be, but a really strong hand might look like, ace, king, queen, jack double suited, 10 jack queen king double suited, All these are very, very strong hands. Notice I mentioned high cards. Well, in pot limit Omaha, there are situations where low cards work too, but the high cards are just better, just like in Hold'em, right? You know, having like King Queen suited is better than having 6-7 suited. So while I would still play 6, 7, 8, 9, I'd much rather have King Queen Jack 9 or King Queen Jack 10 or something along those lines. Unless now you're talking about a pot that got four-way action and you're pretty confident based on the way that your opponents play that they all have high cards and are sharing. Like maybe you think aces and you know, this guy's got like Queen Jack 10, 9. Now if you have 4, 5, 6, 7 double suited or something, or less important to be suited in this kind of situation for reasons we won't get into. But having that kind of a hand, you might have really good equity. And if you hit that flop, you know, chances are you could, you know, get it in really good post flop. So runs are really good, right? You pretty much, before the flop, you can raise with them. In position, you can even 3-bet with these hands to mix it up. Many players who play pot limit Omaha, especially in the early stages of their PLO career, they just only re-raise with aces and kings, right? Well, when you do that, for a lot of other reasons we may get to, you become rather exploitable. If everyone knows 2 of your cards in a 4-card game, like that it's aces or kings, that's really not good for you. So you want to throw in, especially in position, some other hands like 7, 8, 9, 10 double suited or something. If you re-raise with that hand on the button, even if the player re-raises you with aces, that's not the end of the world because you're getting the right price to call, which is going to lead us into our next tip here. When you do raise and are 3-bet, in Hold'em, a lot of times you're just going to fold, right? You raise with ace-10 offsuit, a guy 3-bets you, you're like, he's got a better hand than me, I'm not playing here, it's no value. In pot limit Omaha, very rarely are you going to want it. There are some situations where you do want to fold 3-bets, but it's rare, okay? Especially in position. Actually, in position, I can't imagine 4 cards I would raise with on the button, have the small blind or big blind re-raise me, and fold, right? If it's good enough to raise, it's good enough to call. Because in pot limit Omaha, the hands run so much closer than in Hold'em, right? So I mentioned this in the stud video. Aces against kings, you're looking at 82% for the aces. That's not true in pot limit Omaha. In pot limit Omaha, no matter what 4 cards you got, actually better to not have an ace in your hand in these cases a lot of time. If you get 3-bet by the big blind and you're on the button, having Jack 9, 8, 6 looks like junk, right? Nothing special. However, in position against the player who's likely to have aces, you're getting way the right price because you're getting like 2 to 1, right? And you got position. And if you hit something big, he's got to go first and guess. And there's a lot of ways that you can win this pot by either hitting or bluffing. Pot limit Omaha is a game where position matters way more than it does in no limit Hold'em because so much of the board can be represented, okay? In Hold'em, say for example, an under the gun raises and an under the gun +1 re-raises, the ranges are really pretty narrow, you know? If it comes 4, 5, 6, it's unlikely anybody's in that ballpark, right? Well, with PLO, I mean, a Jack 6 deuce flop, it could be Jacks and 6s. You know, like it could be ace, Jack 6. It could be Jacks at 3 Jacks. It could be, you know, a whole bunch of different hands. It could be, who knows, wraps, flush draws, all kinds of stuff. So because of that, there's a lot of opportunities to use leverage and pressure to force your opponents off hands. So that's why position is so much more important because a lot of times when you do have a made hand in pot limit Omaha, it's dangerous to check and give your opponent a free card and let them draw big. So a lot of times, let's say specifically on the turn, if your opponent checks, well, you can be pretty sure that he doesn't have a made hand and he's drawn. So if you're the one drawn too, you could have a kind of a crappy draw. You could be like, he doesn't have it. He'd bet here. I'm going to bet almost pot and steal this pot away from my opponent. So we talked about hands that are nice and fun to play, right? Well, let's look at some hands that maybe you don't want to get all that excited about, right? Like you got a pair of 5s with a 3 and a 10. Yeah, a pair of 5s. Woo, no. Junk, right? Also, even a hand like if you get ace, king, 9, 6, ace, king, woo, good and hold. No. I mean, especially if it's double suited, sure. Single suited, you're in position, you can go ahead and raise with that kind of a hand. But in general, these are not very, very strong hands. In 3-bet pots, if you raise and get 3-bet and you have a hand with an ace and a king in it, unless, again, you're playing against really good players who they mix it up with like run type hands where they're going to 3-bet you with 6, 7, 8, 9 and stuff like that. Often calling re-raises with like the ace and the king in your hand like that, not ideal. Because you're never going to be too excited. Like you flop an ace, you're like, sweet, top pair, big deal. The guy's representing aces. So it's not like you're going to win a really big pot or you might get bluffed. Who knows, man? A lot of bad stuff can happen, right? So in position, you can play some of these worse hands like Jack 10, 4, 5, you know, ace, king, 6, 9 and things like this. But these are not hands that you should be excited about playing in either early position or defending from the small blind. If you're priced in the big blind, you can be a lot wider in certain situations. But I would advise, especially for you beginning players, to just avoid kind of these really bad hands until you get a little bit more comfortable with playing the game. I would say, you know, there's two ways to play PLO, really. You have successful players who play really nitty, super tight, and then you have another group who plays virtually any four because they have a lot of confidence in their post-flop ability. I learned how to play the game from Phil Ivey. And back then, in the old days, he played PLO a very different way. He limped into every pot, okay? And that sounds really bad now, and it is, pretty much. But he did that because his post-flop ability was so much better than everybody playing at the time. So he's like, I don't care what I got. I'll just pretend I got what's out there. Now, a term you're going to hear a lot when you play Pot Limit Omaha, more so than Hold'em, is the term blockers, right? I got the blockers, right? Like, I think to a certain degree, a lot of players in Hold'em have taken it to the extreme where they're like being absurd now with like mentioning blockers in every situation when they're really hardly that relevant. Well, in Pot Limit Omaha, they're relevant a lot, right? So the obvious example, the standard example is you have the ace of hearts. You don't have another heart with it. You have like, you know, some king, 9 hand with no other heart, but 3 hearts show up on board. Well, you have valuable information. That information is this. Nobody has the nuts. Only you know that, though. So in a lot of these situations, you could bet big, and because flushes are so prevalent, people do play suited cards. If you bet big, your opponent's going to only, even if he has like a small flush or a set or 2 pair, most of the time they're going to fold, right? Unless you have this really wild and crazy image that gets a lot of action. But having that blocker, the ace of hearts, allows you to win when the flush card hits anyway. So sometimes there'll be situations where you might call on the flop with just the ace of hearts when there's 2 hearts out there without actually having a flush draw, just to hope the heart gets there so you can bluff the pot, right? Make sense? Did I go too fast for you there? So 2 hearts on the flop, you got the ace hearts. You got nothing, right? You could still call occasionally to try to see if a heart rolls off on the turn. Then you can win the pot. Or maybe it gets checked down on the turn. You get, you know, the river comes a heart, and you can represent the big flush that way. So blockers are a thing. Obviously, if you have a hand where, you know, you have 2 10s in your hand, okay? So you have 10, 10, ace, king, and the flop comes 6, 7, 9, okay? 6, 7, 9 is a pretty dangerous board, but you have 2 very important cards. You have the 2 10s, right? Now, straights are very likely to happen in PLO. Like, you just need better hands to continue. So with you having 2 of the 10s, it makes it far less likely that anyone left in the hand has the 8-10, which makes the nut straight. So a lot of the times you could bluff them off a better hand. So let's say they have, you know, 9s and 7s, or even queens, kings, or aces, or something like that. You can play those spots aggressively and represent the straight, knowing you have that information that makes it less likely anyone's sitting there with the nuts. So while I mentioned guys, there's a lot more opportunities to bluff in Pot Limit Omaha. I mean, there just is, right? So many more situations than in Hold'em where you can rob, you know, pots. I will warn you of one thing. If you play a big pot where you get your chips in, like 100 big blinds deep or something like that, you need a much stronger hand, okay? Let's take a look at this graphic right here. Say you have the 10, 9, 5, 6, and you're up against Jack, Queen, King, 3 double suited. He's got spades and diamonds. You've got hearts and diamonds, right? Now the flop comes 10, 9, 3 with 2 spades. All right, we got top 2. We got to be happy about that, right? However, notice if you look at the numbers right here, right? We're 2-to-1 dog. We've got top 2 pair. This guy's got a lowly pair of 3s, right? But because he has so many outs, he's actually a 2-to-1 favorite in this situation. So a lot of times players will like think that, you know, 2 pair, yeah, I got to get it in. But on boards like this with flush draws and straight draws and stuff like that, just know that a lot of time, and this is ruling out the fact that he might have 3 10s or 3 9s and have you completely dead. So your best case scenario, if you get it all in against the player in a really big pot, is that he's got a monster draw where you're like a 2-to-1 dog. Your worst case scenario is you've got no outs. You're basically drawing dead or virtually dead. So a lot of times in these situations when you have top 2 pair, don't overvalue them. 2 pair in Pot Limit Omaha, nowhere near as good as Hold'em, so play a little bit more cautiously. Wait till the turn card comes. Now, if the turn card comes a brick, maybe you want to play it a little more aggressively because you go from being a 2-to-1 dog to, in a lot of cases, the favorite, right? Because on the flop, your opponent has 2 shots at hitting all those cards, he's the favorite. Now, take one away on the turn. I'm not saying you should fold a 2 pair, right? You're 2-to-1 dog. You got to at least like see the turn card. But don't go nuts. Don't go, just be tranquilo. I haven't said that in a while. Tranquilo. Chill. You know, if you play big pots in PLO, you better bring the big guns. That wasn't in the script either. The big gun. You get it though, right? When you play PLO, have a really good hand. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Hope you learned a little something more about Pot Limit Omaha. It's obviously a much more complicated game than I was going to share in this video. But again, as a general strategy, position, power, bluff more in position, play cards that just make sense together, that are connected, that are suited, that look pretty, and look for spots to bluff. And remember, if you get all your chips in the middle, have the good. I'm not going to do it again. All right, I'll let you guys off the hook. Okay, stay tuned because next week we're going to do Limit Hold'em. All right, don't fall asleep. Limit Hold'em's a fun game. You'll enjoy it. Take care.